When I got my driver's license, my parents were eager to start offering delivery services from their restaurant. I didn't want to be a waiter or work at the register, so driving sounded like a good option. When this happened, I'd been doing deliveries for a few months and was pretty comfortable with it. It was a Thursday around 8 p.m., and my dad gave me an order to deliver. I got into my car, which was actually my mom's SUV, and started the drive. Google Maps said the house was 25 minutes away. Our town was small, so 25 minutes away was actually pretty far. As I drove, I started to recognize the area as being on the edge of town, and I still had 10 minutes to go. I'd never been this far out in this direction before, so I was definitely paying attention and keeping my eyes open. I wasn't scared per se, but just felt uneasy. The only houses I was passing now were farmhouses far from the main road. When the directions told me to turn, it was down a long, unpaved path leading straight to one of these farmhouses. Now I was starting to get a little nervous. A farmhouse this far out at night was probably the last place I wanted to be. But I knew I was probably just spooking myself, and it was just a simple delivery. I drove down to the end of the path, which ended and just became a small grass field in front of the house. It wasn't clear whether or not to drive on the grass, so I just parked the car there and got out. It was eerily quiet. All I could hear were my footsteps on the grass as I walked up to the house. The porch light was on, but no other lights were on inside the house. I was looking over my shoulders constantly and walked quickly. The longer I was out there, the more uncomfortable I felt. Just before I reached the porch, I heard something. It sounded like it was coming from the backyard behind the farmhouse, but it was loud, like a wooden door opening. I stepped onto the porch, dropped the bag on the doorstep, rang the doorbell, and started rushing back to the car. I regretted how far I had parked and wished I had just driven on the grass. As I listened to the only sound of my footsteps, I started to hear more. Footsteps running behind me, in my direction. I turned around and saw 3 men sprinting at me through the grass. I tried to run back to my car, but in seconds, I was tackled to the ground. One of them held me down while another started taking everything from my pockets. I was yelling and screaming for help, but I knew nobody could hear me. It all happened really fast, and once they looted my pockets, one of the men kicked me in the stomach, and they all ran and got in a car, turning around and driving away. I got up and just watched the headlights disappear on the long, empty road. I had no phone and no way to get back. I didn't know what else to do but start walking toward the road. When I reached the road, I started walking back the way I came. I had no way of telling time, but I think I was walking for 30 to 40 minutes before a patrol car pulled up in front of me. My parents had called for them to check on me because I wasn't responding. To sum it up, the cops found a small barn behind the farmhouse with another restaurant delivery bag inside it. They think the men tried to do the same thing to someone before me, but probably missed their chance or chickened out for some reason, because there were no other reports. The actual owners of the farmhouse were out of town, so they had no involvement. My phone was tracked and found thrown in a field off the side of the road not too far away. The stolen car, however, took 3 weeks to be located. It was found nearly 400 miles away and had been almost entirely emptied. This was almost a year ago now, and those 3 men that attacked me still have yet to be identified. I'd seen their ads everywhere about how the job was so relaxing and easy money, and some of my friends were curious about the gig too, so I took one for the team to figure out if all the hype was true. It wasn't. Driving around on a time crunch made the gig really stressful, and sometimes it would be for just a couple of bucks. I was only a teenager, and the only bills I had to pay were my car payments and car insurance, so making a ton of money wasn't necessary, but it did feel like I was getting ripped off for the amount of time and work. I pushed aside getting a different job because I was lazy, but after this happened, I quit right away. I picked up an order from a local Chinese place and was heading to the customer's address. I don't remember it being a large order or anything, just a normal small order with a small payout. On the way to their address, I got a text in the delivery app. It was my customer asking where I was. Then, another text came in, telling me to hurry up. I was driving, so I couldn't respond. But I was just confused, and honestly a little annoyed. I had just picked up the order a couple of minutes prior, so it wasn't like I was running late or anything. I shrugged it off and thought it was just a mistake on their part. The address wasn't far, only about 10 minutes away. It was in a less well-off neighborhood in my town, with pretty old and small houses. It's actually funny because the customers in smaller, cheaper houses usually tipped more than the rich people. Anyway, I pulled up next to their driveway and got out of my car, holding their bag of food. What caught my attention as I walked up their driveway was that the house had all of its lights off. It wasn't the scariest thing in the world, but it was something I took note of. When I got up to the front door, I knocked quickly and took my phone out to take the picture of the delivery on the porch. But just as I snapped the photo, a man yelled, "Hey!" from my left, standing by the corner of the house. I jumped and awkwardly said, "Hi." He started walking toward me, taking a key out of his pocket. "I don't know what took you so long," he muttered, walking right in front of me and holding the single key up to unlock the front door. The whole situation had me in disbelief. I didn't know what to do or say, so I just stood there like an idiot. "Come here, I need your help. Since you took your time driving, it'll be quick," he said, waiting by the door and holding it open. No, I'm okay. I should really get back to work," I replied, trying to sound firm. The man looked angry and took a step toward me, reaching out like he was trying to grab me. I jolted my shoulder back to avoid his hand, then backed up and walked away from the porch. Just as I got to the driveway, bright headlights flashed over me. The man by the door ran outside and around the house, leaving the front door open as the car pulled up the driveway. It turned out to be the homeowners returning from dinner. The man I met at the door didn't live there, and the homeowners had no idea who he was or how he had gotten a key to their house. We called the police and explained the situation to them. Knowing everything now, it made more sense why the man wanted me to rush to the house. He probably knew that the homeowners could be back at any minute, and he wanted to have enough time to do whatever it was he was going to do to me before they got back. I still don't have any answers for what happened that night or what was going to happen, and I don't think I ever will. But I have stopped doing deliveries. I worked at Luigi's Pizza, and it was laid back and sometimes even fun. It would get really busy with deliveries up until 7 or 8 o'clock, then it would have a sudden drop-off in orders. Our place accepted delivery orders until 11, then only accepted pickup orders until 12. It was a Saturday night, so it was busier than most other days. But after 9:30, there were no more orders. We had someone pick up an order around 10:15, but we had nothing else until 10:50 when the phone started ringing. "Hello, this is Luigi's Pizza," I said. I waited for a second. I could hear light breathing on the other side, but they weren't responding. "Hello?" Finally, a woman started speaking. She was talking quietly and had a shaky voice. She asked for a small pepperoni pizza to be delivered to her address. I said, "Okay," and just before I hung up, something in me made me ask if she was okay. There was just something off about the way she was talking. She said she was just fine and hung up. I sent the order through, and 15 minutes later, I got on the road. The house was a couple of blocks away, and there were no other cars out, so I got there in just a few minutes. As I drove up their driveway and parked, I saw a heavy light coming from around the garage where the front door was. I got the pizza and the receipt ready, and as I looked back, I saw the light constantly going in and out, like someone was walking in front of it. I rounded the garage and realized the light was coming from inside the house, shining out the open front door. I stepped onto the porch, and before I even reached the door, I heard footsteps rushing down some stairs inside. Then a man came into the doorway. He was a tall, heavy-set, bald man. But what was really weird was that he was completely out of breath. He was taking big, exhausted breaths and had sweat dripping from his head. Sure, he could have just been working out, but the expression on his face just made it all the more unnerving. He looked angry and frustrated, like he didn't want me to be there. I don't think I've ever seen someone that unhappy that their pizza arrived. I asked him if the order was correct since he obviously wasn't the one who placed it, which then made me think back to the woman on the phone. Putting everything together made for an uncomfortable possible scenario in my head. I said the total and handed the man the receipt. "Hold on, I need my wallet," he said, walking down the hall toward what I assumed was the kitchen. As I waited for a moment, I heard a quiet sound coming from inside the house upstairs. A dull thump, like someone was hitting the wall. I heard it again, louder this time, and seconds later, the man came rushing down the hallway, grabbing the box from my hands and throwing cash at me, then slammed the door in my face. I stood there in shock for a second, hearing the man's footsteps rushing upstairs. I couldn't hear much else, so I walked back to my car while processing everything. Once I got out of their driveway, I drove a minute down the road, then pulled over. I decided it was best to call the police and just give them all the information I had and ask them to just do a checkup to make sure it was all okay. When I got back to Luigi's, I told my friends about the unusual situation. They thought it was odd too, but none of them seemed worried about it. The rest of my shift went by fast, and I got home at 12:15. Not long after I got a call. It was an officer that did a wellness check on the woman that I said was at the house, only he said there was no woman at all. He described the man, but he was allowed inside the home and never saw anyone else. The man said he lived alone and had no idea what woman I was talking about. I know what I heard, though. Someone else was in that house, and it was definitely a woman that called to place the order. The fact that the man was lying about things that I was 100% sure about made me really uneasy. The cop told me that there wasn't much else to be done unless something else came up. It's been a long time since this all happened, but I still think back to it. I could be blowing it all out of proportion, but there's a big part of me that doesn't think so. I was driving for Rico's pizza delivery. It was a slow night, so I was actually spending a decent amount of time inside the shop waiting for orders to come in for me to deliver. Just after 10 p.m., a man walked in and came up to the counter. He looked like he was in his early 30s, but was extremely sleep-deprived and maybe even drunk. My coworker, Jake, was at the counter helping him with the order, and I was standing in the back organizing the pizza boxes. But after seeing his appearance, I listened in on their conversation. He seemed timid and uneasy about something, as he made a simple request for a medium pizza. Then he added on that he'd like it to be delivered and handed Jake a slip of paper. Right after the order was sent through, the man walked out. The paper just had an address written on it, but it was kind of odd because who wouldn't remember their own address? Also, it's not every day that you get a customer coming into the shop to order for delivery to their house. Anyway, 10 minutes later, I boxed up the pizza and got on the road. It didn't take long for me to notice a strange car behind me. It was the only other car on the road, and they were constantly speeding up and slowing down like they were having trouble staying at the same speed. Once I saw them swerving too, the first thing I thought was that they were drunk and how the man at the shop looked drunk too. It seems stupid now, but at the time I really thought it was just a coincidence. When I got to the neighborhood, the car behind me pulled off to the side of the road and parked. 30 seconds later, I pulled into the driveway of what looked like any other house and stepped up to the front porch. I knocked, then knocked again, and after a couple of minutes of waiting, someone finally answered. It was a different man from the one I'd seen at the shop that ordered the pizza. "I have a Rico's pizza delivery for Matthew," I said. The man stared at me with very wide-open eyes, and I noticed that he looked very similar to the way the other man looked, sleep-deprived and drunk. It took him a few seconds to respond. Yeah, of course. "Thank you," he said quietly, reaching out for the pizza. I gave it to him, and he looked at me like he was going to say something else, but he didn't. He just continued with his dull look. I then turned around and saw a guy in a hood jogging down the sidewalk just 2 houses away, but he was looking right at us. I quickly went back to my car, and the man at the door stepped out onto the porch like he was going to follow me. I got in and started backing out, but the guy in the hood went right behind my car to block me from leaving. The other one then started running toward me, and in the heat of the moment, I just stepped on the pedal to go in reverse. The guy behind the car jumped out of the way at the last second, and both of them started yelling and chasing my car onto the road. In the streetlight, it became clear that the man in the hood was the guy who came into the pizza shop. With them still running at the front of my car, though, I had to reverse dangerously fast down the street until I could safely make a 3-point turn and get away. I called the cops, and within the hour, both men were arrested for attempted robbery. Their plan was clearly made while drunk because they thought that by ordering at the shop, we somehow wouldn't think it was them, because it was a delivery order, even though we had their name and address. It really made no sense, but according to the record, they had pulled multiple robberies before, and one of them resulted in the victim getting beaten up in a parking lot for no reason. Two drunk guys running at me with bad intentions could have escalated into something horrible, but I was glad to have gotten away without any harm, and thankfully they won't be able to do this to anyone else. I drive a van for work, delivering products to a few family-owned stores around my city. One night, just 4 months ago, I was driving my route between 3 stores to do some after-hours deliveries. It was about 11 p.m., and I had just finished the last delivery for the night. From there, the warehouse where I had to drop the van off was 30 minutes away. I drove for maybe 5 minutes until a car pulled up behind me at an intersection. There were no other cars out, just me and them. When the light turned green, I started driving, and it wasn't until a few more minutes down the road that I realized they were still right behind me. I was in a big, slow van, so most people would just go around me, but they didn't. I wasn't worried or anything, but it was odd. As we continued driving, their headlights steadily got brighter and brighter until they were so close that the light was being blocked by the back of my van. They had to be just a foot or two away from my bumper. The lane next to us was open, so they could easily just go around. But instead, they chose to tailgate me, which then started making me nervous. I slowed down to a stop sign and was going to turn just to get away from them. But just as I stopped, the car behind me bumped into my van. The crash wasn't bad, but it was enough to shake the whole van and push me forward a bit, which I knew had to cause some damage. I put my van in park and unbuckled, about to get out to see the damage, but a man was already at my window. He was smiling and motioning to talk to me. I opened the door, and as I stepped out, I saw 2 more guys at the back of my van, both looking at me. The man started to give excuses as we walked over to look at the bumper, but it became obvious that he was very drunk. His words were hard to make out, and he didn't seem very bothered about crashing into me at all. The other guys looked intoxicated too, just from how they were moving, but I didn't know for sure. My van and his car looked a lot worse than I thought. I asked the man for his insurance and went to get mine, but when I got back, I realized none of them had moved. I asked again for his insurance, but all of them just looked at me without saying anything. There was this moment of me looking at them as they stared at me in silence before my heart started racing. I turned to run back to my van, but instantly I heard all of their footsteps coming up behind me. I didn't even make it to the door before one of them grabbed me and shoved me against the side of the van. The one holding me was making threats, while the others went back and forth, piling up everything in their car. After a minute of having my head pressed against the side, he shoved me away and started forcing me to walk toward their car. The other guys finished taking what they could and got in the car, telling the man behind me to hurry up as he opened the back door and tried pushing me into the back seat. I knew that if I let him get me in that car, I would likely never be seen again. I put all of my strength into fighting back, doing everything I could to make it as difficult as possible to get me inside. After a 20-second struggle, he tossed me away and got in himself. Then they drove off. I got up and ran to get my phone from the center console, then called the police. The men who attacked me couldn't be identified and still haven't been, and it was hard to say if it was a one-time drunk attack or something they had done before. What they planned to do by bringing me in the car with them is also a mystery, but I think we all know what would have been the most likely outcome. When I was a solo driver, I was making a delivery in a small town called Maple Ridge. It was a hot summer evening, and the sun was setting over the town, casting a golden glow over the streets. I had been driving for hours, and my GPS led me to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a sense of unease settling in. The building seemed abandoned, and the only sound was the creaking of old wooden crates in the wind. I grabbed my clipboard and stepped out of the truck, feeling the warm air envelop me. The receiver, a gruff-looking man with a thick beard, met me at the loading dock. He signed for the delivery, and I began to unload the cargo. But as the hours ticked by, he kept me waiting. claiming there was an issue with the paperwork. As the clock struck 7 and my driving time was up, I needed to find a place to park for my mandatory 10-hour reset. The receiver suggested I head to the nearby Truckhaven truck stop in Clearview, just across the state line. I thanked him and climbed back into my rig, feeling frustrated and tired. The drive to the truck stop was uneventful, but as I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed it was eerily quiet. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I parked in the very back, where the darkness seemed to swallow my truck whole. My dog, Noodles, a scruffy little terrier, whined in the passenger seat, sensing my unease. I took Noodles out for a quick walk, and as we strolled through the deserted lot, I noticed a man standing behind a trailer, just staring into space. His presence sent a shiver down my spine, and I quickened my pace, hurrying Noodles back to the safety of the truck. After settling Noodles in, I grabbed my dinner bag and headed to the truck stop's restaurant. As I walked, the sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I turned to see the same man from the trailer following me at a distance. My heart raced, and I picked up my pace, weaving through the parked trucks. But no matter how many turns I took, he kept pace with me, always lurking just out of sight. I pushed open the door to the restaurant, grateful for the warm glow and bustling atmosphere inside. The place was packed, and I slid onto a stool at the bar, ordering a burger and fries. As I waited for my food, I glanced around, searching for the mysterious man, but he was nowhere to be seen. Halfway through my meal, nature called, and I excused myself to use the restroom. When I returned, my fork was on the right side of my plate. I'm left-handed, and I always place my utensils on the left. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had touched my food. I called the waitress over, still standing behind my chair, and asked if she had messed with my meal. She denied it, and I asked if she'd seen anyone else near my plate. She shook her head, too busy to notice anything. I requested the manager, and when he arrived, I told him about the strange man and my tampered food. The manager's expression turned serious, and he offered to replace my meal and move me to a safer seat. As I waited for my new food to arrive, he disappeared into the office and returned with a stern look. "I reviewed the camera feed," he said, "and a man did indeed approach your plate while you were in the restroom. He added something to your mashed potatoes, stirred it, and left the building." My skin crawled. The manager offered to call the police, and I agreed, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. As I finished my new meal, the manager sat down across from me, his eyes scanning the restaurant. "I don't want you to leave alone," he said. "The police will escort you to your truck." Before long, 2 officers arrived, taking statements and searching the premises. They found no sign of the mysterious man but promised to keep an eye on the truck stop. One of the officers offered to drive me back to my rig, and as we walked through the dark lot, I felt a sense of gratitude toward these kind strangers. As we reached my truck, the officer told me his partner would keep watch over the lot all night, ensuring my safety. I thanked them both, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The night had been long and terrifying, but thanks to the kindness of strangers, I made it through unscathed. As I settled in for the night, Noodles curled up beside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mysterious man was still out there, watching and waiting. But with the police keeping watch, I felt a sense of security, and eventually, my eyelids grew heavy, and I drifted off. It was a dark, chilly evening, and I was driving alone on a deserted road. My job as a delivery driver often took me through remote areas like this, but I never felt uneasy before. As I cruised down the empty highway, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. I turned my head and saw a woman sitting in the passenger seat of a car next to me. Her hair was twisted into a tight bun, just like Miss Trunchbull from that movie. But what caught my attention was her terrified expression. She stared at me with wide eyes as if she had seen a ghost. Before I could react, the car abruptly veered off at the next exit, leaving me bewildered. I shook my head, trying to shake off the eerie feeling creeping up my spine, but the encounter lingered in my mind as I continued my journey. About half an hour later, another car pulled up alongside me. This time, the driver was different, but the woman in the passenger seat was the same. Her hair was still in that tight bun, and her expression remained frozen in fear. It was unnerving to see her again, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to pull over at the next rest stop to report the strange sightings to the authorities. But before I could make a move, the car disappeared into the darkness. I cursed under my breath, feeling frustrated and helpless. I continued driving, my senses on high alert. Hours passed, and I was nearing Ravenwood when it happened again. The same car, the same woman, the same terrified expression. But this time, something was different. She seemed to be screaming at me, her mouth forming silent words of desperation. I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched her. Without hesitation, I pulled over into a nearby lay-by and dialed the emergency number. My heart raced as I recounted the bizarre encounters to the dispatcher. To my relief, they informed me that they had received similar reports from other drivers in the area. As I waited for the authorities to arrive, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that engulfed me. What was happening? Who was the woman in the car, and why did she look so terrified? Minutes felt like hours as I sat alone in the darkness, the only sound being the distant hum of passing cars. When the police finally arrived, I eagerly shared every detail of my encounters with them. But despite their efforts, they couldn't find any trace of the mysterious woman or the car. I drove home that night with a heavy heart, haunted by the memory of the woman's terrified face. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had witnessed something otherworldly, something beyond my comprehension. In the days that followed, I scoured the news for any mention of the strange sightings, but there was nothing. It was as if the encounters had never happened, as if I had imagined it all. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was something sinister lurking on that desolate highway, something that defied logic and reason. And though I tried to convince myself otherwise, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had come face to face with the supernatural that night. From that day on, I avoided driving alone on deserted highways, always keeping an eye out for any sign of the mysterious woman with the haunted expression. But no matter how far I drove, her image remained etched in my mind, a chilling reminder of the night I encountered something beyond my understanding. As I looked back on that fateful night, I couldn't help but wonder, was it all just a coincidence? Or had I stumbled upon a glimpse of the unknown? A glimpse of the things that lurk in the shadows, unseen and unexplained. I was a new nurse at Ravenwood Hospital and had only been working there for a couple of months. The hospital, with its creaky floors and dimly lit corridors, always gave me a sense of unease. But I was determined to prove myself as a competent nurse despite the eerie atmosphere. One night, I was assigned to care for Mr. Harrison, an elderly man who had been admitted for pneumonia. As I entered his room, I noticed he was staring intently at the corner of the room, his eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Harrison, is everything all right?" I asked, trying to hide my apprehension. He turned to me, his voice trembling. "There's a girl standing in the corner. She's been there for hours, just watching me." I glanced towards the corner, but saw nothing except shadows cast by the flickering light. "There's no one there, Mr. Harrison. It must be your imagination." But he shook his head vigorously. "No, she's real. She's been haunting me since I got here." I reassured him as best as I could, but his fear was palpable. Throughout the night, he would glance nervously at the corner, muttering about the ghostly girl. As the hours passed, an unsettling feeling crept over me. I couldn't shake the sensation that we were not alone in the room. Every so often, I would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. As the clock struck midnight, I decided to check on Mr. Harrison again. But when I entered his room, he was no longer there. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched the room, but he was nowhere to be found. Just then, a chilling breeze swept through the room, causing the hairs on the back of my neck to stand on end. I turned towards the corner and saw her, the ghostly girl that Mr. Harrison had spoken of. She was pale and translucent, her eyes hollow and empty. She stared at me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to run, to flee from the room and never look back, but something held me in place. a morbid curiosity mingled with a sense of duty to my patient. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. The ghostly girl tilted her head slightly as if considering her response. Then, in a voice that sounded like it came from the depths of the grave, she spoke. "I am trapped here, cursed to wander these halls for eternity. But you can help me." Her words sent a chill coursing through my veins. "How can I help you?" She beckoned me closer, her spectral hand outstretched. "Find the locket. It holds the key to my freedom. Find it and set me free." I hesitated, unsure whether to trust the ghostly apparition before me. But something in her eyes, a desperation mingled with sorrow, compelled me to listen. "Where can I find the locket?" I asked, my voice barely steady. She pointed towards the hospital's abandoned wing, a place rumored to be haunted by restless spirits. With that, she vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the darkness. Determined to uncover the truth, I ventured into the abandoned wing of the hospital. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay, sending a shiver down my spine. As I made my way towards the attic, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows danced along the walls, whispering secrets long forgotten. Finally, I reached the attic and began my search. Boxes piled high with old medical equipment and yellowed patient records lined the walls, creating a maze of forgotten relics. But amidst the chaos, I spotted it. A small tarnished locket nestled among the debris. With trembling hands, I reached out and grasped it, feeling its weight in my palm. As I held the locket, a sense of foreboding washed over me. I knew that by opening it, I would unleash forces beyond my comprehension. But I also knew that it was the only way to fulfill my promise to the ghostly girl. With a deep breath, I opened the locket, revealing a faded photograph inside. It was of a young girl, her face filled with innocence and joy. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed through the attic, sending me reeling backward. I looked up to see the ghostly girl standing before me, her form flickering in and out of existence. "You've done it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. "You've set me free." As she spoke, a blinding light enveloped her, illuminating the attic in an otherworldly glow. And then, with a final wisp of smoke, she vanished into the ether, leaving behind only silence. I stood there alone in the attic, the weight of what had just transpired settling over me. But amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was also a sense of peace. For I had helped a soul find redemption, and, in doing so, had discovered a strength within myself that I never knew existed. Last night, I couldn't sleep at all, which is fairly normal since I work graveyard shifts, and it's pretty much turned me into a night owl. Even on my days off, I'm usually up all night long. So, there I was, in bed watching a rom-com, laughing and in a great mood, and I decided that I deserved to treat myself to the occasional drink. My bar is in my basement, which is fully finished and furnished. It's pretty much a man cave. I've spent entire nights down there by myself or with friends, and nothing strange has ever happened, so anything creepy or weird down there was the furthest thing from my mind. I finished laughing my butt off and headed down there. I went behind the bar, poured myself a drink, and headed back upstairs. But as I was on the second to last step to the first floor, from behind me, I heard a voice say, "Hey!" coming from downstairs in the middle of the basement. It was an older man's voice, probably in his 50s. I knew the house was empty except for me, and it scared me. I looked down there and nothing moved. No one spoke or came forward, and I freaked out. I jutted up the last 2 steps and slammed the basement door closed. I wondered if I had imagined it or if there was someone in my house. As I stood there panicking, I heard the same man's voice coming from down in the basement, but muffled by the door. By the intonation, he asked a question and then continued to talk right after, as if he was having a conversation with me. The question sounded something like, "Where are you going?" I couldn't make much out, especially what he said after that, but I was panicked, adrenaline pumping, and thought, This is scary. Someone broke into my house. I ran into the next room, grabbed my flashlight and my trusty baseball bat, and headed back down there. Silence. Just silence. Slowly, I turned on every light in every room down there, ready to defend myself, but nothing. Every nook and cranny was checked, and the basement was empty except for me. I went down to the basement this afternoon after I woke up with my trusty bat in hand and rechecked the whole place. I found nothing. No one. Just me questioning both my sanity and reality. I know what I heard. That guy was pretty loud, and he was talking in my direction and at me. Even through the door, I heard him talking down there at me up the stairs. It seemed like he was trying to have a conversation with me. I've never had any kind of break-in. This is a very safe neighborhood. Or any kind of remotely strange experience down there in my 15 years here. Does stuff like this happen to people out of the blue? Or am I finally losing my mind? I don't know what to do now. It happened at 1:50 a.m. At this point, I believe it most likely was paranormal. And I think I'm going to go down there tonight to repeat the same process at the same time and see what happens. My curiosity's gotten the better of me, and I want to know what he or it has to say. If it's an intruder, I'm coming prepared this time, but it should still be very interesting. I've been down here from 1:45 a.m. until 3 a.m., walking around, asking and looking, and nothing. Part of me feels like it needs the darkness, or even just that element of unpredictability to manifest. It was a scary night in Charlotte. My parents had left earlier for a dinner party, leaving me home alone. Normally, I didn't mind being by myself, but tonight was different. Tonight, something felt off. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the glowing numbers on my alarm clock. It was past midnight, and the darkness outside seemed to seep into every corner of the house. I wrapped myself tighter in my blanket, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Suddenly, I heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible over the howling wind. "Jake!" it called, drifting up from downstairs. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze in terror. Who could be calling my name at this hour? My parents wouldn't be back for hours, and I didn't have any friends nearby. I strained my ears, listening intently for any other sounds. The house was eerily silent, except for the occasional creaks and groans of its aging structure. I hesitated, debating whether to investigate or stay put in the safety of my room. Curiosity and fear warred within me, but ultimately, curiosity won out. I had to know who or what was calling my name. With trembling hands, I slipped out of bed and tiptoed to my bedroom door, peering into the dimly lit hallway. I took a deep breath and summoned all the courage I could muster. Slowly, I descended the stairs, each step echoing loudly in the silent house. The air grew colder with every step, sending shivers down my spine. As I reached the bottom of the staircase, the whisper came again, louder this time. "Jake," it called, sounding closer now, as if it was right around the corner. I swallowed hard, my throat dry with fear. Steeling myself, I rounded the corner and entered the living room. The room was bathed in darkness, illuminated only by the pale moonlight filtering through the curtains. I squinted into the shadows, searching for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it. A figure standing by the window, its silhouette stark against the moonlit backdrop. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached cautiously, my footsteps barely making a sound on the carpeted floor. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't respond, but I could feel its gaze boring into me, cold and unrelenting. With a trembling hand, I reached for the light switch, flicking it on in one swift motion. The room flooded with light, illuminating the figure before me. It was nothing, just a coat rack draped with my parents' coats, swaying gently in the breeze. I let out a shaky sigh of relief, feeling foolish for letting my imagination run wild. But then I heard it again. The whisper. Closer now. Right behind me. "Jake," it hissed, sending chills down my spine. I whirled around, but there was nobody there. just empty space and the faint sound of the wind outside. Panic seized me then, and I bolted for the front door, desperate to escape whatever unseen presence haunted our house. But as I reached for the doorknob, a cold hand gripped my shoulder, sending shockwaves of terror through my body. I spun around to face my attacker, but there was nobody there. Just an empty hallway stretching out before me like a corridor of nightmares. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet as I tried to flee. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl emanating from the darkness. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before, primal and full of menace. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing as I backed away from the unseen threat. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the growling stopped. The house fell silent once more, the only sound the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I stood there, frozen in terror, unsure of what to do next. But then I remembered the phone. I had to call for help. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my cell phone, dialing my parents' number with shaking fingers. But as the phone rang on the other end, I realized something chilling. The voice that answered was not my mother's or father's. It was the voice from downstairs, the one that had been calling my name all along. "Jake," it whispered, sending a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't have come looking for me, Jake. Now you're mine." And with that, the line went dead, leaving me alone in the darkness with whatever unseen horror lurked in the shadows. I sank to my knees, tears streaming down my face as I realized the truth. I was not alone in the house, and whatever was with me, it was hungry for more than just my name. A couple of years ago, I was home alone in Seattle, enjoying a rare night of peace. My parents had gone out for a dinner date, and my siblings were away at college. I was looking forward to a night of binge-watching my favorite TV show and indulging in some guilty pleasure snacks. As I settled into the couch, I noticed that the house was eerily quiet. The creaks and groans of the old wooden floorboards seemed louder than usual, and the wind outside seemed to be whispering strange melodies. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as the night wore on, the strange noises grew louder and more frequent. I heard footsteps outside my room and the sound of someone rummaging through the kitchen. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling, but deep down, I knew something was off. I decided to investigate, my heart racing with anticipation. I slowly got up from the couch and made my way to the kitchen, my senses on high alert. As I entered the kitchen, I was met with an unsettling sight. The lights were on, and the room was spotless, but there was a feeling of unease in the air. Suddenly, I heard a faint whispering in my ear. It was a soft, raspy voice, and it seemed to be coming from all around me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The voice grew louder, more urgent, and I could make out the words, "Get out while you still can." I knew then that I had to act fast. I quickly grabbed my phone and dashed to the front door, but as I reached for the handle, I realized it was locked. I was trapped. The whispering grew louder and more menacing, and I knew I had to think fast. I ran back to the living room and grabbed a nearby vase, ready to defend myself if necessary. As I stood there, frozen with fear, I heard the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. They were heavy and deliberate, and they seemed to be getting closer. I raised the vase, ready to strike, but as the figure entered the room, I realized it was not what I expected. It was a woman, tall and gaunt, with long silver hair and eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. She was dressed in a long white gown, and she moved with a slow, deliberate pace. As she approached me, I could feel a chill run down my spine. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't respond, but instead, she reached out a bony hand and touched my face. I felt a surge of electricity run through my body, and suddenly I was flooded with visions of the past. I saw a family, happy and laughing, but also a tragedy, a loss that seemed to consume them all. I saw the woman standing in the same spot, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. As the visions faded, I realized that the woman was a ghost, trapped in our home for decades, and I knew that I had to help her find peace. With a newfound sense of courage, I reached out and took her hand. Together, we walked through the house, uncovering secrets and memories that had been hidden for years. As we reached the front door, I knew it was time to let her go. I opened the door, and she vanished into the night, her eyes finally at peace. As I stood there, feeling a sense of relief wash over me, I knew that I would never forget this night. I had faced my fears and helped a lost soul find peace. And I knew that I would always be grateful for that. This happened to me last summer when I was back at my parents' house in a quiet neighborhood in Asheville during the holidays. I had just finished college and was looking forward to a relaxing break. My parents' house is surrounded by tall trees that cast long shadows at night. It's a cozy place, but it can feel a bit creepy when you're alone at night. It was around 3:00 a.m., and I was in my room scrolling through my phone, wide awake despite the late hour. Suddenly, my phone rang, and I saw my sister Jenny's name on the screen. That was already a bit weird since her room was just down the hallway from mine, and she could have just come in and talked to me. But I picked up the phone anyway, and as soon as I said hello, the call ended. I thought maybe she had hung up by mistake, so I got out of bed and walked down the hallway to her room. As soon as I reached her door, I heard her screaming. It was a loud, terrified scream that sent chills down my spine. I quickly opened the door and rushed inside. She was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear, and her face pale. I asked her what was wrong, and she pointed to the corner of the room, her hands shaking. I looked over, but there was no one there. She started crying, and told me that she had woken up and seen a dark shadow just centimeters from her face. She said it was tall and menacing, and it had made her feel like she was being suffocated. I tried to calm her down, telling her it was just a dream, but she insisted that it was real. She said she had called me for help, but when I reminded her that her phone was downstairs in her purse, she looked confused. That's when things started to get weird. I checked my phone, and there was a log of the call from her number, but when we checked her phone, there was no record of the call. It was as if the call had never happened. We were both confused and a bit spooked, so we decided to go downstairs and make some tea. As we sat in the kitchen, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. The house was quiet, but I kept hearing creaks and groans like someone was moving around upstairs. I tried to tell myself it was just the old house settling, but deep down, I knew it was something more. We stayed up for a few more hours trying to make sense of what had happened, but the more we talked, the more confused we became. It was as if we were trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Eventually, we went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the dark shadow Jenny had seen and the mysterious call that had disappeared from her phone. I started to feel like we were being watched, like something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike. The next day, we told our parents what had happened, but they just shrugged it off, saying it was probably just a prank caller or a bad dream. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew what my sister had experienced. It was real, and it was terrifying. After that night, I started to notice strange things around the house. Doors would slam shut on their own, and I would hear footsteps in the hallway at night. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or my imagination, but deep down, I knew it was something more. I started to feel like I was living in a horror movie, and I didn't know how to escape. I was trapped in a never-ending nightmare, and I didn't know how to wake up. One night, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and started searching the house from top to bottom. I looked in every room, every closet, and every corner, but I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. But as I was about to give up, I heard a faint whisper in my ear. It was a soft, raspy voice, and it seemed to be coming from all around me. "Get out while you still can," it said. I spun around, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, and it sent chills down my spine. I knew then that I had to get out of the house, and fast. I ran back to my room, grabbed my bag, and started packing. Jenny saw me and asked what I was doing, and I told her we had to get out of there. She looked scared, but she didn't argue. We quickly packed our bags and left the house, not looking back. We never went back to that house again. and we never spoke about what happened that summer. But I know that I'll never forget the terror I felt and the feeling that something was watching us, waiting. It was a stormy night in Portland, the kind where the wind howls like a wounded animal and rain pelts against the windows like icy daggers. Lightning slashed across the sky, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Amid this tempest, I found myself alone with my little brother, Jake. Our family had left earlier for a week-long trip, leaving Jake and me to fend for ourselves. I wasn't too thrilled about being responsible for my 8-year-old brother, especially on a night like this. But we had plenty of food, emergency numbers, and assurances from our parents that everything would be fine. As darkness settled over the house, the storm intensified, rattling the windows and shaking the very foundation of our home. Jake and I huddled on the couch, trying to distract ourselves with a movie. But the storm's fury made it hard to focus, and an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Midnight approached, and Jake had already drifted off to sleep, snuggled up against me for warmth, but I couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that hung in the air. Lightning illuminated the room in brief, stark flashes, casting long, sinister shadows that seemed to reach out for us. And then, amidst the chaos of the storm, I saw him, a tall figure standing outside our window. My heart skipped a beat, and I held my breath, hoping it was just a trick of the lightning. But the figure remained, tall and imposing, his silhouette stark against the darkness. He seemed to be staring right at me, his gaze piercing through the thin veil of rain-soaked glass. I wanted to wake Jake to tell him what I saw, but fear rooted me to the spot. I watched in horror as the figure moved closer to the window, his movements slow and deliberate. Lightning flashed again, and for a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of his face, pale and twisted with a cruel smile. A cold shiver ran down my spine as the figure tapped on the glass, the sound echoing through the room like a death knell. Jake stirred beside me, but I dared not move. I prayed for morning to come, to chase away the darkness and the terror that came with it. The figure tapped again, more insistently this time, and then, with a sudden jolt, he tried to open the window. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. But before I could do anything, the window creaked open and the figure slipped inside. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest as the figure straightened up to his full height. He towered over me, his features obscured by the darkness that cloaked him. I could smell the stench of decay emanating from him, a sickly, sweet odor that made my stomach churn. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. The figure didn't respond. Instead, he took a step closer, his movements slow and deliberate. I could feel his gaze boring into me, cold and unyielding. I wanted to run, to scream for help, but fear held me in its grip. I was paralyzed, unable to move as the figure closed in on me, his presence suffocating. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. I blinked, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Had it all been a dream, a trick of the storm? But then I saw the open window, and I knew it was real. The figure had been here, in our house, mere inches away from me. I stumbled backward, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. I had to get out of here to find somewhere safe until morning came. With trembling hands, I grabbed Jake and rushed out of the house, not daring to look back. As we stumbled into the night, the storm raged on around us, its fury matching the terror that still pulsed through my veins. The figure was out there somewhere, waiting in the darkness, and no matter how far we ran, I knew he would always be one step behind us, his presence haunting our every move. But as the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, chasing away the darkness and the terrors that came with it, I knew one thing for certain. I would never forget the night the tall man came to visit and the fear that he brought with him. It's an ongoing issue even now. During the time when our old dormitory was set to be demolished, I first encountered Anik. With the imminent loss of our housing, my friends and I scrambled to find new accommodations. In our city, bachelor pads were notoriously difficult to come by. However, after much searching, My friends Jack and Sean discovered an old house. They informed us and suggested we all go check it out. Along with some juniors, we went to see the house, and that was the first time I met Anik. The moment we stepped inside, Anik's face grew pale, and he muttered that something was terribly wrong with the place. When we pressed him for details, he remained silent. We made our way to the third floor to inspect the rooms. There were 3 rooms, each capable of housing 3 people. We liked the place, and even paid the advance. As we were deciding who would take which room, I noticed Anik standing in the room I had chosen, staring intently at something. When I asked him which room he wanted, he replied, "Bro, the tube light in your room is going to break." I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a weird coincidence. Our group had a peculiar tradition. If someone went to the bathroom, others would lock the door from outside and turn off the light. It was a prank we all enjoyed. The bathroom had no ventilation, so once the light was off, it became pitch dark. From the very beginning, Anik warned us, "If I go to the bathroom, don't pull this prank. There's something wrong with this house." A few days after moving in, the light in my room broke, just as Anik had predicted. We bought a new one, but it too broke within a week. Eventually, we switched to energy-saving bulbs, which seemed to solve the problem. One afternoon, Anik was taking a nap. I decided to play the prank on him. I locked the bathroom door from outside and turned off the light. Expecting him to panic and yell, I was surprised when he remained eerily quiet. After waiting for about 5 minutes, I turned the light back on and unlocked the door. Anik emerged, but his face was pale, and blood was trickling from his eyes and nose. Terrified, I watched as he washed his face and said, "I told you there's something wrong with this house." From that day forward, we all agreed not to play that prank anymore. Things took an even darker turn when our friend Sam visited. While we were chatting in the room, Anik rested his head on Sam's lap and started crying blood. We were all freaked out and immediately took him to the landlord's house for some first aid. Desperate for answers, I later asked the landlord's wife if there was any history of paranormal activity in the house. She initially denied it, but eventually revealed that there used to be a cursed tree on the 3rd floor terrace. Anik somehow knew about this tree, even though he had never seen it. He claimed he could time travel, which was why he knew about the tree. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Anik's warnings were not to be taken lightly. The house held secrets, dark and sinister, and despite our attempts to live normally, those secrets kept surfacing, each more terrifying than the last. The terror of that house still lingers, haunting us with its dark presence, and the events that unfolded continue to plague our thoughts, a nightmare that refuses to end.